One, two. Check. One, two. One, two. Yeah, yeah. I'm in the Mootcourt. So I'm streaming it right now. Yes. Yeah. So I want you to let me know the. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm gonna do a test. Just 1, 2. Check. 1, 2. 1, 2. Mic check. Mic check. 1, 2. This is a test. Brooklyn Law School admitted student program to start. This is a test. 1, 2. This will start momentarily at 1:50, I believe. Check. 1, 2. No, no, there's gonna be a delay. Like, yeah. Okay. I don't know why this thing say that. The stream current bitrate is at 1103 kilobytes per second, and it's lower than the recommended bitrate. We recommend that you use a stream bitrate of 4,500 kilobit per second. I have to talk to probably Annie because she did tell me. Cause I told her, no, no, because it was doing that same thing in Fort Chetty, and then after that it goes back. It goes back. Yeah.
This should be working. Yep.
Sounds good. Okay. All right, great. Well, what a great turnout. Hi, I'm Professor Kaplow, and I have the pleasure and privilege and sometimes the pain of being the Associate Dean for Experiential Education, which means that's sort of a big mouthful, but basically my responsibilities are to direct all of our experiential programs, which includes clinics, what we call externships, which often are also called internships, and also courses that are teach lawyering through simulation. So up here is the happy news that we're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary of our clinical program here at the law school. What that may not have much meaning for those of you who are not born 50 years ago, or not even born 25 years ago, that we are one of the earliest clinical programs in the country. Now, I don't want to misrepresent around the country, there were older programs, but we started our program in the early 70s, in 1970, and have been growing it year after year after year into what is basically its present very robust condition. But we're really excited because we're reaching out to all of our alums, and so many of them have gone on to have fabulous careers, which we all take responsibility for starting. So my job here today is to talk to you a little bit about our programs and also to answer any questions you might have. Okay, so let me just make sure I'm doing this right. I'm not. Here we go. Thanks. Anyway, so to start out with, this is sort of a teaching philosophy, right? That some of you probably ring a bell because different people learn in different ways. So in your 1L year, you're going to be sitting in class and you're going to be basically in the seat of, in the chair for the entire year. But once, and to some extent, although I think today there's a lot more creativity going on in the 1L classroom about bringing the world into the classroom, that, by and large, your first year is about learning principles and doctrine and kind of transforming yourselves into thinking more like a lawyer, to use that cliche. So one of my favorite quotes is the one that is attributable to Benjamin Franklin, and maybe this will ring a bell to some of you about how you learn best, which is basically first, if somebody talks at you and lectures at you, maybe you absorb some of it, but a lot of it you probably don't absorb, or maybe you try to figure it out when it's time for the exam. Teach me and I will remember is basically not just lecturing at you, but trying to be more creative and thoughtful about how you are conveying information. But involve me and I learn is really the best step for how you learn something. And I'm sure you all understand what it's like to learn from experience. So you can read all the driver's ed books you want, but you don't know how to drive a car until you've actually driven it. And we in the legal education world used to say, until clinical education really took hold, that every other professional training, doctors, architects, engineers, all required some on the job training, some hands-on training before you could actually do the work on your own, or even do the work being supervised by somebody else, but understand what it is you're doing, because law is not about is very intellectual, but it's also about being able to do something and to help people and to practice law. Okay, so we take experiential education very seriously here, but generally across the country, it has now basically taken hold as a serious and required part of all legal education. So American Bar Association, which probably most of you know, regulates law schools. Maybe about less than 10 years ago, enacted a requirement for graduation from any accredited law school that a student must take at least 6 credits of experiential education, which would mean, again, clinics, internships, or simulation courses. And so that becomes a mandate for any of you just to be able to graduate from any law school, regardless of where you go. Here at Brooklyn Law School, we also require that every student before he or she graduates take at least one semester, not necessarily how many credits, but one semester of either a clinical program or an internship or an externship. And I'll explain the difference between the two in a minute. So you can satisfy your 6 credits by taking one of the courses, but we also say every student must take at least one of those courses. Not a simulation, because that's not getting you out in the real world. That's not allowing you to interact with actual clients or adversaries or judges, but we have this as a requirement. Also, the New York State Court of Appeals, for bar admission in New York, requires that you certify that you are have the requisite skills and competency to practice law. Now, of course, we know that you're not going to be an experienced lawyer. You're not going to be the same lawyer when you graduate as you will be 30 years later. But the New York State Bar has given a lot of emphasis to what legal education should be providing to its students. Okay, so we basically have 3 tiers of programs. The first would be what we call in-house clinics. Now, in-house clinics are programs where we instruct full-time instructors here at Brooklyn Law School enroll a smallish number of students, because of course the level of supervision and intensity is pretty extreme, so the student-faculty ratio is small, but say 8 to 10 students in a clinic that we personally supervise. And the principal learning theory of that clinic is that you would be responsible for the work, that you're the lawyer on the case. Now, obviously, we provide you with a giant safety net. We're responsible ultimately for the clients, but New York State allows law students to, in effect, practice law without a license, as long as you're participating in a clinic where you're being supervised by a lawyer. So we have a wide range of those programs, which I'm going to introduce a few of them to you, but due to time constraints, I can't tell you about everyone, but I encourage you to look at the inventory of, the course listings on our website. So our clinic office is located in 111 Livingston, which is around the corner, and we moved there about 4 or 5 years ago to gorgeous 20th floor space with smashing view, and it really is a law office. And so students who are in the in-house clinics work in that law office, and we function as a law firm. So we have all of the clinics, and the clinic instructors are all there. And if you're in a clinic, you'll basically be going to your classes, but you'll be going to work. And these clinics are credit-bearing clinics. So if you're earning 5 credits in your clinic, that's 5 credits out of your total program. Just to introduce you to one of them, Professor Deborah Bechtel up in the corner there. Her clinic is a clinic, we call it the Corporate Real Estate Clinic, and in that clinic, it's basically a fancy way of saying an affordable housing clinic. She works with low-income co-op buildings here in New York, largely in Brooklyn, but also in Manhattan and the Bronx, where people are either buying. The tenants in a building are either buying the building, or sometimes the building has financial difficulties, so they work on restructuring their financials. They get loans for them, and it's basically a mini real estate office. But the clients are not individuals; they're these low-income co-op entities. So the students are always involved with their clients, but at the end of the semester they always do a closing. Either a loan closing or a property transfer closing, and you can see on the bottom some happy clients and the happy students at one of their closings. We also have a clinic which is affectionately called BLIP, standing for Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic, taught by Professor Jonathan Askin. And basically that clinic is a tech-oriented clinic where students will generally do a couple of things. Often they'll represent individuals who are little startups. They're trying to get off the ground, and they're basically business counsel to those organizations or would-be organizations. So they help them form business. They may give them other types of advice, and sometimes they give them advice and the client decides not to go forward. So it's really almost like a law firm where somebody will come to consult a lawyer. They also do projects involving policy with respect to tech. And Professor Askin himself is very involved in other types of projects into which he brings students. For example, he has a social justice project where they're using technology to develop or to help develop websites or apps for people to have better access to information relating to their legal situations. Okay, this is our LGBT clinic, and Professor Susan Hazeldine to the left. And this is another happy picture of an adoption, a same-sex family adoption that took place in family court. The students did all the work in connection with the case, and this is the day that they went to court to finalize the adoption. That clinic also does a variety of other types of cases, civil rights cases, employment discrimination, and they even do some immigration work. This is one of our newer clinics, a criminal defense and advocacy clinic taught by Professor Kate Modulescu in the bottom left. That's a picture of her students who are just coming out of Rikers Island, which is about to be closed, hopefully, but it's the local prison right near LaGuardia Airport, for those of you who are not familiar. And this clinic does a variety of work. They, as you can see, they are, for a while, they were heavily involved in helping individuals with convictions for relating to and growing out of domestic violence. This year, they're taking advantage of a new law that was passed in New York, and they're doing resentencing motions for individuals who are in prison for long sentences, and this new law allows their sentences to be reduced. So the students have been spending a lot of time going to prison. And this is a clinic that really draws on a lot of people who are interested in the criminal legal work in the future, particularly defense-oriented students. This happens to be my clinic, the Safe Harbor Project, which is our immigration clinic. And we represent people, a lot of people in connection with asylum applications, as well as other forms of humanitarian relief. The map sort of pins places in the world where we've actually represented clients and have, and in fact, our clinic was just in court this morning on a case for a client from Sudan. And in 2 weeks, we're going to another case of the client from Yemen. So we have the experience of working with people from some of the worst places in the world, and sometimes working with people who've suffered quite a lot. So it's, but on the other hand, it's a clinic which teaches students both substantive law about immigration law, as well as transferable skills of interviewing clients and representing them in court. So those are a few examples of our in-house clinics. We also have clinics that do employment law, a clinic for community development where the students work with small community groups as opposed to individuals to help them with their legal problems. So we have clinics that are both transactional, meaning the students are engaging not in litigation or in conflict in any way, but they're helping clients do things like write contracts or form a corporation. And then we have clinics that are litigation clinics, and students will appear in courts all over. I just heard last night, I teach criminal procedure at night this semester, and one of my students in the class is working in one of our hybrid clinics, which I'll tell you about in a second, the prosecutor's office in the Eastern District, and they just successfully prosecuted a case and won a trial before a judge in the Eastern District, which is quite an experience for law students to have a federal trial. Maybe it's the last one they'll ever have, but they had it while they were still going to Brooklyn Law School. So there are basically, we have two other sort of models of what would be hands-on learning. And I'm just going to not go to externships quite yet. So we have a bunch of clinics that we call hybrid clinics. Those clinics follow the teaching model of an in-house clinic. In other words, the students are the lawyers, and they're supervised by an experienced attorney. But the difference between the in-house clinic and the hybrid clinic is that the in-house clinic takes place, guess where? In-house. And the hybrid clinic is basically off-campus. So to use the example of those students I just mentioned, they go every week to the Eastern District U.S. Attorney's Office, and they're assigned cases. And instead of the prosecutors in that office actually doing the trial, they did the trial. They examined the witnesses, they argued before the judge, They did all the written work under the supervision of an assistant U.S. attorney. So we have in order to sort of expand our programs and to offer more variety, we have a lot of arrangements with organizations such as the Children's Law Center, where students are representing children in family court. We have another arrangement with the Brooklyn DA's office, where again students are like student prosecutors. We have an arrangement with the New York City Law Department, which is the city's lawyers, where students do litigation on behalf of the city, largely also in federal court. We have a housing rights clinic where students represent tenants. So we're able to really go farther afield than just our more limited capacity with our in-house clinics. Again, all of these programs are geared to giving you the responsibility of being the attorney and the work, and to learn through doing. I read lots of drafts of student work, and my goal is to get them better and better. And if a student like today was doing a hearing, we spent a lot of time practicing and developing your skills. So it's very intensive, but it's also a fabulous learning experience. And so moving on then to the externships. So seeing the continuum, in-house clinics take place on campus, supervised by full-time faculty. Hybrids take place off campus, but are supervised by adjunct faculty who commit themselves to your education. Externships, which really I'm sure many of you are familiar with, are basically you go off to an office. It could be a judge's chamber. It could be a city agency. It could be a private practitioner. It could be a nonprofit. You go to that office, and generally you go 12 to 15 hours a week, and you become a resource to that office. And they're committed to training you and to educating you as well, but you're a little bit more of a drop-in than in our hybrid situation. So, and you're there for the semester, and you're learning what you need to learn to be in this job setting, but generally you are not the principal on the case. You would be there as sort of a second seat to the lawyers who are supervising you. From time to time, students in these clinics actually do get to go to court, or they do interview witnesses, or they do things, but it's not, it can vary dramatically from place to place. So sometimes a student will work at Sony, and they'll work on doing licensing agreements for the entire semester, or a student might work for a legal aid society, and they would be in court on misdemeanor cases or something like that. So there's a huge range. More than 100 students every semester, and also in the summer, are doing these externships. And for many students in their 1L summer, that's what they'll principally be doing. They'll be doing an externship for credit. It's not that easy to get a paying job your first summer, unfortunately. Okay, so again, if you look on our website, you'll see it's almost impossible to list all the places students have worked. And by the way, if you just look out the window, it's probably hard to, go ahead, look out. It's probably hard to judge, but the building immediately along the way, right there, that kind of grimy looking building, that's the New York State Supreme Court. And then looking a little bit behind it, where it's a little nicer looking building about the same height, that's the federal court. And the building over here, there's a Marriott Hotel, and right behind that is the DA's office. If you look that way, even though there's no window, there'd be a criminal court. So, and family court is over there too. So there's every court you can imagine within walking distance of the law school. Plus, all you need to do is get on the train, or even better, walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, and you'll be right in front of the main court area in Manhattan. Students will go to the Bronx, they'll go to Queens, they'll spend time even in Long Island or Westchester. So we have students fanning out everywhere. So I always like to joke that sometimes a student will go to court, for example, in federal court, representing, in this case, the U.S. Attorney's Office. But meanwhile, the defense attorney on the case might have a Brooklyn Law School intern. The judge might have gone to Brooklyn Law School, or has a Brooklyn Law School clerk, or has a Brooklyn Law School intern at the time. So we're sort of everywhere. And, my favorite, oh, you went to Brooklyn Law School? So that's kind of what you hear around the city. Okay, so this year we actually started one of our professors is a sports law expert, teaches sports law, so she decided she would have a dedicated sports law externship. So those of you who are familiar with Brooklyn know that the Barclay Center is down the street. We have students working there for the Nets and also some of these other places right now. So, we're always looking to kind of grow and expand and add new things. We also have a couple of semester-long externships. To be frank, this is not something that a lot of students do, but we do offer it. So for one is that we allow students to work abroad for international human rights organizations for a semester, and we set up Skype calls and supervision sessions with faculty members here. So I would say probably over the last 10 years, only about 5 or 6 students have taken advantage of this, but they've all done great, interesting work in many different places around the world. We also allow students to go to DC for a semester in a similar kind of a way. They check in with a faculty member on a regular basis. And in this context, you would have to work for a federal agency or some sort of nonprofit that doesn't provide the same thing in New York. So it gets people who are interested in a career in DC to get down in that market. We also have something called PIPS, Public Interest Public Service, which is a 1-year, third-year internship full-time. And students work we have partner organizations and students work there and then are guaranteed a postgraduate year-long paid fellowship. So they're basically spending 2 years in the setting, once as a 3L and once as a first-year law graduate. I just was listing all of the simulation courses that we have there. And remember, this model is that you're basically, like some of you've probably done mock trial or some of you have done other things. It's that kind of learning where you are learning in the role of the lawyer, but only not in the real world. So I've highlighted just a few that were a little different, just so that you could see that we have the great variety we have, and they're just in alphabetical order. But these would count as experiential courses as well. So we got a lot. I don't want to click too fast in case you want to read. Okay. All right. So I thought I would just introduce you to a few clinic students. And guess what? They were all my students. So this is Travis Elliott, and at the moment, he is what we call a pro bono scholar. New York State established a program a couple of years ago where 3L students can take the bar exam in February rather than wait till July after they graduate. And the promise there is you take the bar early, and then once the bar is over at the end of February, you then work for basically 3 months in a nonprofit providing resources or increasing access to justice to individual clients. So not every public service, you couldn't work, for example, for a judge or for the government. You would have to work for a nonprofit like Legal Aid or Brooklyn Legal Services or other nonprofit organizations. So Travis, who is destined to go work at Cleary Gottlieb, which is a big Wall Street firm, is now at Brooklyn Defender Services as a pro bono scholar and is getting credit as if he was doing an externship for this. He just finished taking the bar exam. I'm sure he passed it. And he's spending the next period of time and even through graduation doing this. And then he's done. And what's nice about the pro bono scholar program is that if you pass the bar, you pass it, you find out usually in May sometime. And part of the deal from New York State is that they will expedite your admission to the bar, which is really helpful because in many situations, admission to the bar allows you to A, earn a little more money, and B, do more things. Once you're an admitted lawyer, you can appear in court on your own, or in a law office, you're more valuable to them for that reason. So this is a great program, and usually somewhere between, not that many people do it, somewhere between 8 and 12 students do it. So Travis is one of them. But before he did that, he did a range of things. He worked in an externship as in-house counsel for the Barclay Center for the Islanders. And he also spent a semester in my clinic where he represented mother-daughter asylum seekers from Egypt. And it was a very challenging case because we had two clients and they had an interesting potential conflict of interest, even though they were mother-daughter. I'm sure some of you have conflicts with your mother or daughter, so you understand these things, but these were legal conflicts. Anyway, so he did a great job with his partners. And the first summer he was here, his 1L summer, he did an internship for a federal judge in the Southern District of New York. So you can kind of see the range of things that one student actually can do. And just one last student to introduce you to this Amelia photo. So starting from the bottom, she worked in her 1L summer at Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, which is basically a criminal defense service. Then she worked in my clinic the same semester as Travis, and she represented an asylum seeker from Tibet who was a monk and who came to all of our meetings in his monk garb. So it was a very interesting a lesson in learning about another culture. Then the next semester, she was in the LGBTQ advocacy clinic, and that's her in that clinic at a Know Your Rights session that the clinic organized, and they created the material, and they went out in the field and conducted Know Your Rights sessions. Then she worked over the summer at Unlocal, which is basically an immigration organization. Then she was a community health advocates in the fall in connection with our health law externship. And finally, this semester, she's in the criminal defense and advocacy clinic. So she is really the model clinical student. She's done a little bit of everything. And just to give you an idea of the kind of work, so you don't have to necessarily be a public interest minded person. There's lots to do in both our externships and also even in our clinics. The student, for example, who does the BLIP clinic or the community development clinic, learn transactional skills that would carry forward. And, our basic idea is skills that you learn while you're in school are transferable for the most part. Interviewing a client is interviewing a client. Sometimes your clients are going to be rich and powerful. Sometimes your clients are going to be poor and disempowered. But the theory of interviewing is probably just the same. So the idea of clinics is that, and any of this experiential learning, is you take what you've learned and apply it in the future and become good learners about how to do things. So you develop habits of learning as well. So that's it from my spiel. But I'm happy to take questions if anybody has them. Is anybody here applying or admitted to the part-time division for the evening? Okay. We also try to accommodate the schedules of part-time students, and you still have the graduation requirement of taking a clinic. But we have some clinics operate in the evenings to make life easier for the people who have to work during the day. Any other questions? Well, I'm going to suggest you do this. On our go ahead. Yeah, could you talk just a little louder? Yeah. Yeah, no, the post-grad year is funded by the placement. You become an employee, but they only guarantee you employment for the 1 year. What has tended to happen is one of two things. Students stay on, they're very happy, the employer likes them, and they give them, full-time employment. Or the student says, I've had enough of 2 years at this place, but now I'm ready to move on. And they're in a position to move on because they've had 2 years of experience at that point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can do anything that's pro bono where you're actually representing clients. No, BLIP is not part of it at all. Okay, and representing people doing startups would not count as the kind of work for the pro bono. The idea for the pro bono scholars is to increase access to justice for poor people. So doing business law would not fit it. Okay. The court sets those limits. It's not our limit at all. Yeah. Yeah. Well, look at Amelia. No limit. She took one every semester. Okay. There used to be, but it's actually, the question works in the opposite way. You know, that there are limits on certain types of credits, so certain what they call non-classroom credits. But generally speaking, all of the in-house clinics, all of the hybrid clinics, you can pretty much take one a semester. You can only take one clinic or externship each semester, however. That there's that limit. And most clinics are offered between 4 and 5 credits grand total, because every clinic has a class associated with it. So there's a seminar, plus there's what we call the fieldwork component of it. Yeah. You betcha. Okay, you can't stand at the copy machine. You can't run out for coffee. We have a learning contract with every externship that they promise to give you what we would call an educational experience, and to be thoughtful about what they're not only what they're asking you to do, but how they're supervising you, what kind of feedback you're being given, and we monitor compliance with that pretty carefully. So if somebody's not doing that, we cut them. They're on our no-fly list. Other questions? Yeah. Okay. So an externship or clinic would be between 4 or 5 credits. Students typically take, I think you have to take at least 10 credits to be full-time, and you can't take more than 16. So, you know, students will take 3 or maybe sometimes even 4 other classes. It also might depend on whether other co-curricular activities they're doing, law review, Mootcourt, things like that. Yeah. Well, the answer is yes and no. Here's the answer is it's not a question of whether, it's a question of when. So as I mentioned, the enrollment's not big. The externship is kind of elastic. You know, there's as many opportunities as there are places out in the world. But the in-house clinics and the hybrid clinics tend to only accept somewhere between 8 and maybe maximum 12 students each semester. But most of them run on a semester-long basis, so we try to maximize opportunity that way. So and we give preference to somebody who's reapplying. Yeah.
Somewhat correlated to that, what are the sort of application components to these?
Oh, okay. It's nothing complicated. Certainly not as complicated as your law school application. It's basically an application form where you list the clinics in order of preference, and generally speaking, you know, you'll be considered by your first choice first, and then if that doesn't work out, we'll ask you, do you want to go to your second choice? And then we ask you to it's all online. We ask you to upload a CV, a writing sample, your transcript, and then we review them. And some people interview, some people don't. Depends. A lot of our adjuncts don't have the time to interview a lot of people. The timekeeper. We don't have bells here for the end of class. Nothing else? Okay, well, just before I forget, we have a newsletter online. If you go onto the website, and you go I'll try to give you the map to get there. There's a section on the very top that says clinics. You click on that, and you'll see the most recent issue of our newsletter, and then archive newsletters. And if you look at them, I think you'll get a really good sense, at least, of what the in-house clinics do and what some of the hybrid clinics do, and the kind of accomplishments that our students have while they're still students. And that's really the important part. And you know, not to boast too much, but I will, that very often, I see students years later, I see alumni at reunions and stuff, and they'll always say, maybe because they know I want to hear it, that my clinic was the best experience of my entire law school. That may not be actually true, but I think a lot of people do feel that way, and retain close relationships to their clinical instructors, because you're working really closely at a very formative time of the students' learning. So we are big boosters of our clinics, and I think every sort of component of the law school supports us very very actively. So it's great, and everybody's encouraged to take clinics and take more than one clinic if you want to stretch your skills too. So if you ever want to ask a specific question, feel free to email me. It's Caplo. I'm on the website. And you could also, if you need to ask more specific questions of anybody else about their clinic, you can always email one of the instructors because, if you look, you'll see the name of the instructor who teaches the clinic and their email address. Yeah. But this is how you would link up to the newsletter. So I want you to read the newsletter because I write it. Okay. All right. Thanks for everybody. I hope I'll see you all in September or August, actually, which is something I'm never getting used to, that you have to go back in August. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Dean Caplo. So next for the next portion of the day is going to be a mock class presented by Professor Ressler. She is a 1L professor, and she also teaches other classes. It's going to be basically a mock 1L civil